Yo, how's it going? Today we've got a new video. Leave that comment to let me know if you're enjoying this manhwa. She mentioned how the elders of the secondary family were saying that Soran had been very insolent. Soran stated that he would test this by confronting the clan elders directly. My jaw dropped. He laughed loudly while saying that the boy was amusing. The next day, everyone was gathered in a hall. The clan elders were skeptical. The warrior handed Soran a wooden box. The warrior informed him that he had mixed licorice powder and honey to make it sweeter and easier to consume. Soran was impressed by how the man paid attention even to the smallest details. Soran asked the warrior if he had done it exactly as described. The warrior replied that he had followed the instructions carefully. Other clan members commented to stop exaggerating, questioning how incredible it could be. The patriarch ordered silence and asked Soran how he would prove the remedy's effectiveness. Soran acted surprised by the question. The clan elders shouted that it was natural to confirm this. One elder exclaimed that they would never dare send unverified poison to the Lord of Sichuan City. Another elder agreed, saying that if something went wrong, it could lead to a great disaster. Soran responded that there was no other choice. The warrior understood. The clan elders were confused because the warrior handed the remedy to them. They became irritated, thinking it seemed like Soran was telling them to test it. A tall elder asked Soran if he knew what that was. Another elder commented that Soran had been playing around for so long that it seemed like his guts had darkened. Soran smiled. He called his grandfather Musan and asked what he needed. Soran brought up what Musan had said before, that those who mastered the Tang clan's martial arts were never afraid of poison. Musan joined the scheme and confirmed this statement. Then Soran pointed out that the elders' reaction implied they were scared. Musan agreed with him again. Soran provoked the great elders of a clan that had certainly mastered immunity to poisons. He used reverse psychology and expressed that surely those elders weren't afraid of something as trivial as beetle poison. This irritated the elder, who split the remedy in two. They claimed they had nothing to fear from such an insignificant low-quality poison. They took the remedy and told Soran that he underestimated them. They threatened Soran, saying that if he didn't act, he would face consequences. The elder shouted that they would be the ones upholding the laws and principles of their clan. They chewed. Silence followed. Then they smiled and shouted that nothing was happening. But the elder felt his masculinity rising. The long slumber of the serpent had ended. They were embarrassed, and that day the laws and principles of the clan were straightened, pun intended. It happened magnificently. The remedy was sent to the Lord of Sichuan City, and its effects proved excellent. Shortly after, the elders crossed the hall, holding their pants apart to hide the evidence. I remember walking like that when the time came. Anyway, Soran told Musan that it was exactly as he had predicted. Provoking the elders with something related to poison made them fall immediately. Musan knew they were the kind of people who had nothing but their pride, so this would naturally happen. But Mang also understood that their actions came from a place of concern for the clan. He told Soran not to resent them too much. Mang stated that in the end, they were all one family. Soran replied that he understood. V hurried in. She reported that something terrible had happened. They asked what it was, and she told them that their children were acting strangely. Soran blushed and was perplexed, while Musan became scary as he called his grandson by affinity and grabbed him by the collar. Musan asked what that meant, why they had children. Soran was drenched in cold sweat. They hadn't yet had their wedding ceremony. But Han shouted that what she meant wasn't human children, but the spotted centipedes, the ones Soran was raising. Soran was stunned. Surprised was an understatement to describe his reaction. Lately, he had been doing many physical training sessions, and every time he asked V to take care of them, he ended up completely forgetting about them. He became worried that something had happened to his babies. He asked to see them, and it seemed like he was about to grab Han's chest as they were stored there. Han screamed that they weren't there. Muan was perplexed. A moment later, the 3 blue-spotted centipedes were all brown and weak. A handprint was on Soran's face. It was funny how he was slapped because of his previous actions. Soran looked intensely at the centipedes while Musan was curious if those centipedes had just fallen from V's body. V with a B replied that they seemed fine before, but now she was worried they might be getting sick. Their color looked a bit pale. The shells seemed strange, but Soram reassured her, saying there was no reason to worry. He explained that this was called molting. Creatures like centipedes with hard shells shed their exoskeletons as they grow, and that was probably what was happening. The mother asked if they were already starting to molt. Soran replied that it would happen soon. One of the centipedes moved in a strange way, and then its head appeared. They were astonished. It was an incredible sight. Then the other two began to shed their exoskeletons as well. They successfully completed the molt, and now all of them were out. V noticed that they seemed almost twice as large as before. She asked if those little centipedes had names. Soran realized they didn't. His thoughtful expression was amusing, and what was even funnier was the names he came up with. Number 1, Number 2, and Number 3. It was so silly that Hanan refused to accept it. She argued that mottled centipedes are said to transform into dragons after living for 1,000 years, so they needed names worthy of dragons. Soran childishly argued that there was no way a mottled centipede could become a dragon, even after 1,000 years. Mua joined the game. A Malhada centipede of 1,000 years is called a dragon. With this answer, Soran realized it must have been Han's grandfather who taught her that. But then Soran thought seriously about the names and decided to call them Nova, Mira, and Grace. The first was Nova, symbolizing the beginning. The second was Mira, meaning fragrance, and the third was Grace, representing something elegant or gentle. Han was delighted. She didn't object because, in her view, naming the children was the father's responsibility anyway. Now the speckled centipedes had their names. A whole day later, the speckled centipedes returned to cling to Soran's body. He still didn't feel completely dry, but it was enough to move. However, he still felt strange. The centipedes were now heavier. Before, they were the size of thick sausages, but now they had grown to the size of his forearm. It seemed that the speckled centipedes thought his embrace was too tight for them, so now they coiled comfortably around his arms and waist. While lying down and hugging the centipedes, Soran heard someone talking. Two men were passing by. One of them had a full bag in hand and commented on how the Tang clan of Sichuan was always so extravagant. He invited his friend to go to the brothel, and the friend thought it was a good idea. They laughed, saying that earning money had never been so easy. Soran felt uneasy about it. At the pavilion, Shan stated he had great news. It was about the medicine they sent to the Lord of Divan's city. He shared how it worked exceptionally well, and how the Lord of the city sent a message of gratitude, including a generous reward. Soran and Hanan were delighted. Shan was also proud and happy to reap so many benefits shortly after accepting Soran as a son-in-law. Soran was glad to be able to help. Because of this, Shan suggested granting Soran one of his elixirs. Shan knew that if he called it a reward, Soran would probably refuse out of modesty. Soran's grandfather had said before that an elixir was something that enhances inner energy. Tara asked what kind of elixir it was. Shan replied that it was nothing extraordinary. It was the honey of the golden bee, the king of golden fur. In Soran's mind, he pieced these words together and deduced it was common honey, but he knew how crucial inner energy was to becoming a martial master. So he decided to accept it for now. Thanking his father-in-law when he interrupted, Elo reminded him that he should reward Soren and questioned why it was only Mel. Shish Olsen became nervous upon seeing the threatening behavior of A. She argued that what Soran had accomplished was no small feat. Even though the golden bee was a mid-level poisonous creature, Mel is the lowest classification among elixirs. She said he shouldn't be stingy in rewarding Soran for such a great achievement, which left S embarrassed. She scolded her father, saying he should grant something equivalent to a year of internal energy. She couldn't understand how he could give an elixir that provides only 2 months of internal energy. Shellen felt sad and justified that it was still an elixir, and that it had been quite expensive to obtain. But this only made her more irritated. She argued that compared to what Soran had done, it was a trifle. Zhao was in a difficult situation. Soran asked what the golden bee was. Shan explained that it's a mid-level poisonous creature occasionally found in forests, its size as big as a small dog. He said consuming its honey grants internal energy equivalent to 2 whole months of secluded meditation. Imagining the bee's size, he became excited and amused, but An restrained his thoughts. She told him she was feeling upset with him. Zhao clarified that this was not his intention. It was just because he thought Soran might like to see the golden bee in person. Upon hearing this, Soran got excited and asked if he was suggesting he see the golden bee himself. That was exactly what Chasan had in mind. Internally, Soran interpreted this as harvesting the honey himself. He had done this a few times during his days as a YouTuber. The knights eagerly followed him toward the door. Soran commented that when it comes to bees, he's basically an expert. Shelson knew Soran would like the idea. Soran asked what the golden bee looked like. Shesh simply replied that it was like bees. Vian could only sigh, and thus the journey to collect the honey began. Shelson provided them with top-quality information, so they thought there would be no competitors. But when they arrived, they found 2 clans fighting. Apparently, those people had also bought the information. One clan asked the other if the guy they bought it from had disheveled hair and a large wart on his face. The other clan replied that it was indeed the guy. But regardless, they wouldn't give up easily. Hearing these descriptions, Soran remembered the 2 men who had passed by him. He realized those 2 were selling information everywhere. One of the men became truly furious with the scammers and shouted, "How dare you insult the Tang clan of Sichuan?" His loud and angry voice, along with the mention that they were from the Tang clan of Sichuan, made those men nervous. Now the peaceful journey to collect honey was far from peaceful. Before Sarang set off on his first journey outside, Chilson warned him to be cautious. As a member of his family and someone from the Tang clan, he should never reveal who he truly was. Saran politely replied, yes, to this. Then Chon looked at something beside him, which made Soren turn his head as well. There were men lined up in front of him. Chilson informed Soren that he would lead those people. It was time for him to learn how to manage others. Soren was baffled. He thought it should be Vun. Joe called him silly and explained that since Vun was his woman and he was her partner, this made him the highest authority in the group. Upon hearing the word partner, Soren became embarrassed. V believed he would do a good job and promised to help him along the way. He replied that he would do his best, but now, amidst all that chaos, he wondered what he should do. He asked the man next to him what they should do in that situation. Soran questioned whether it would be better to share the... Soran was talking with the leader of the Venom unit, Blund Wolfgang. Wolfgang was not pleased with the fact that someone had dared to share the clan's information. Tang Vun agreed, saying that whoever that person was, they had a lot of courage. She was seriously irritated and expressed it with her intimidating aura while questioning the sale of information purchased by the Sewanang clan to someone else. Those from other clans recognized her as the poisonous flower of the 3 flowers of Morum. One man couldn't believe that a direct descendant of the Tang clan, the poisonous flower, was there in person. The man was forced to greet her. He represented the Central Wind sect and clarified that they had no intention of interfering in the affairs of the Sichuan clan. He stated they would withdraw. The Noble Origin sect also decided to withdraw even though it saddened them. The Ghost Hunter of Jad also followed suit, withdrawing. One of them swore to catch that damn traitor and skin him alive. They all quickly dispersed. Soran noticed the influence of the Sichuan clan. He asked if the problem was resolved. Wolfgang replied that it wasn't. He knew those unorthodox bastards wouldn't retreat so easily. Wolfgang suggested setting up a camp nearby and taking shifts to keep watch. He knew those men were probably hiding, waiting for the right moment. He instructed Pia to find out where they had set up camp. Soran seemed worried. Vun assured him that everything would be fine. He was more concerned about his golden bees. They hid behind a rock while watching the bees. The bees looked really cute, as if they were wearing fake fur on their bodies. Several of them flew into a log. Soran was excited to see those golden bees. V admitted it was the first time she had seen them too. From a tree trunk, Soran got excited upon seeing those golden bees. V admitted it was the first time she had seen them too. She pointed out how big they were. Soran found them cute. Vaughn was impressed by their fluffy fur. The Afghan was also pleased to see them. Soran noticed how small the colony seemed. It looked like there were only a few hundred of them, but considering their size, it made sense. Vum asked about colonies. Soran explained that it referred to a group of bees, and generally, a small hive would have about 5,000 to 7,000 bees. V was shocked that Soran could say that without even entering the hive. Soran replied that he could estimate by observing how many bees were entering and exiting the entrance. Someone appeared behind them. It was Pai, who reported they had located those unorthodox bastards. The Afghan asked where they were. Pai hesitated to respond at first, but as the Afghan expected, those bastards had set up camp on the opposite side. They didn't seem to be doing much, but if anything happened, they would definitely act. The Wolfgang decided to wait until nightfall to harvest the honey using the Clang method. Soran asked about this method. The Wolfgang explained that if mugar leaves were burned, the smoke would calm the bees, and during this time they could harvest the honey. Soran responded that it was an excellent method, but Pai was worried because the wind was blowing in their direction at that moment. With that, the plan fell apart. Then Soran thought of something and asked if it was clever. Soran explained that if the wind was blowing toward them, it would mask their scent. So, he decided to take this chance to make a quick visit. He was already on his way when V grabbed his shirt to stop him, saying it was dangerous. The golden bee was a mid-level venomous creature, but Soran wasn't crazy about it. He stated he would just touch it once and return. While he struggled to get away from her, a small pebble fell and rolled toward the hive. They immediately knew it was bad news. In the blink of an eye, the colony swarmed out. V grabbed Soran as she ran. Afterward, they received a monumental scolding. It was twilight, and Soran was still thinking of another way. If they lit the fire against the wind, they would be caught between the unorthodox bastards and the hive. The golden-haired king bee was a bit different from the bees he knew. These bees detected ground vibrations from more than 30 kilometers away. Not even ground bees could do that. V found Soran and shared that the children had finished their meal. They kept trying to escape, so she brought them to him. Soran thanked her. Soran gently told the little ones to behave. One of them sat beside Soran, which left him bewildered. She asked if he had made any progress. He replied that he needed to observe a bit more. She admitted she felt like she was pressuring him and apologized for it. She told him to take as much time as he needed, as long as he didn't feel overwhelmed. But this had the opposite effect on him. Awil noticed something on the other side of the old tree. Monkeys. The monkeys were noisy. V noticed how one of them was extremely irritated. Soran called her name and asked if she smelled something sweet. V noticed the aroma. Soran realized it might be pheromones and quickly told her they needed to leave because the bees were about to swarm. V grabbed him and fled hurriedly. She jumped high and created some distance, still holding Soran by his armpits. The Afghan was stunned. The bees quickly left the hive, and their target was the fallen monkeys. They devoured the corpse. It was a close call for that pair. V was intrigued about how Soran knew the golden-haired king bees were about to attack, since he managed to warn her to leave even before they heard the buzzing. He replied it was because of the smell. Vum finally noticed the faint magnolia scent. Soran was surprised that she could really detect the pheromone scent. She answered that she had smelled that scent before and said it smelled like a magnolia flower. Soran was excited to have found the answer and laughed like a wicked maniac. An blushed because his hands were on her shoulders. With a devilish smile on his face, he declared that he had thought of a way to deal with those unorthodox bastards chasing after their bees. He said, "Come, we have some extras by the campfire." Some extras drank rum, others ate and drank until they dropped. The extras questioned when the clan would collect honey. One of them commented that it was hard to say because 3 days ago, they were everywhere, but now it's all gone. Maybe they'll do something soon, he said, and asked another what he thought. The other responded, "Maybe." Another extra dressed in black asked if it was really possible to make money from beehives. Furious at his ignorance, one of them said, "The candles made from the wax of the golden king bee are treasures used exclusively by the imperial family. The clan will only take the honey and leave. Then the leftover hives will be ours. Excited, another extra commented that if they failed this mission and were eliminated, it would be even better. He started laughing and reminded them about the Tang family group, which has the famous 3 flowers of MM. He quickly added that they should be careful not to accidentally kill the murim flower. Another extra expressed his eagerness to see the murim flower, calling it a beauty. Soon, everyone gathered around the campfire, some even uttering vulgar words. However, when they least expected it, their excitement vanished as they smelled something strange coming from the forest. Realizing the scent was pleasant, they wondered if it was the fragrance of the poisonous flower. For a moment, something awoke, a loud noise. In that scene, with the moon hidden by the night, thousands of bees appeared. Seeing the unfavorable situation, they panicked and started running, shouting, "They're Golden King bees!" But it was no use. The bees flew at high speed, catching the extras and tearing them apart mercilessly. The forest was overtaken by screams of horror and despair. Hidden, the others observed the outcome of the protagonist's plan. Seeing that it was working perfectly, someone commented that it was a brilliant idea, and the bees were heading in a single direction. Curious, she questioned the protagonist, not expecting the bees to become so furious because of the flower scent. Dodging the subject, the protagonist responded that he had ordered the bees to launch a mass attack. Not understanding the meaning of a mass attack, she replied, "You just crushed some flowers and spread the juice." The protagonist explained, "This scent triggers an attack command for the bees. It's the smell of a pheromone, a chemical signal used by animals of the same species to communicate. Social insects like ants and wasps rely heavily on pheromones," he continued. "The pheromone I used is exactly the one bees release when they launch a mass attack. It's called isopentyl acetate." Fascinated, she asked if he was saying that magnolias emit the same scent that bees use to signal an attack. Finding it a bit awkward, the protagonist commented that what he found most fascinating was her ability to recognize that scent. She replied that it was the specialty of the Tandia clan, poisons. She was very sensitive to smells. Soon, his attention turned to the forest. The protagonist remarked, "With the golden bees launching their mass attack, we can enter now." They approached the tree with a strange object wrapped in leaves. Slowly, they entered the hive of the golden bees. The elder remarked on the danger and insisted on going first. Inside, they were amazed. The protagonist commented, "They're enormous." Incredible. They gazed at the massive honeycombs. The elder, holding the wrapped leaves, began creating smoke and joyfully said, "Thankfully, they left. These honeycombs are huge." The protagonist agreed but noticed something and remarked, "Unfortunately, there's no honey here." Disappointed, the elder replied, "That's impossible." On observed that it was empty, as the protagonist had predicted earlier. Curious, the elder commented that this had never happened before and found it very strange. Something else caught the protagonist's attention. He remarked, "There are no eggs in this hive either." The elder asked if this had anything to do with the hive being without honey. The protagonist explained that it seemed the bees had been preparing to migrate from the start. That must be why they consumed all the stored honey and carried it in their stomachs. One reason, he added, could be that they sensed many human presences nearby. She commented that it made sense. While examining one of the honeycombs, the protagonist noted that when bees prepare to migrate, the queen stops laying eggs. He is unable to take care of the larvae, and while meddling with one of the combs, something else catches his attention, showing surprise on his face. Right behind one of the combs, there is a bee with a slightly macabre smile. The protagonist asks his leader how long he can use the art of mobility continuously without rest. The old man, with his hand on his beard, says that if he maintains a constant pace, he can last about half a day. Curious, the old man asks what it's about. But something interrupts them. A supporting character appears at the entrance of the hive, shouting the protagonist's name. The character shouts in despair that the Golden King bees are returning. Indeed, they are really coming back. In panic, the supporting character pleads with them to leave immediately. Desperate, they begin to run. However, the protagonist stays behind. The old man tells him to flee immediately, but seeing that the protagonist isn't moving, the old man comes back, grabs him by the clothes, and drags him by force. Soon, they are running again. While still running, the protagonist carries a bee he caught and hid in his clothing. A little farther from the hive, they stop to catch their breath after running so much. The supporting character comments that they barely made it out in time before the bees returned. However, something soon surprises them. Looking at the protagonist, someone asks what he is carrying. The protagonist, with his innocent face, casually comments, "It's the queen of the golden king bees." He explains that since they couldn't bring honey, he brought the one who makes the honey. The old man shudders. "You brought the queen bee?" The queen bee looks a bit confused. Realizing what the protagonist has done, they all scream in despair. The beautiful little bee yawns, and the protagonist, with his macabre smile, calls the squad leader and says that the bees will notice their queen is missing at any moment and will start chasing them. Soon, in the forest, as expected, thousands of bees begin to appear. The protagonist, as if nothing had happened, says they'd better run. Thus began a life-or-death chase. They flee so much that dawn breaks. The queen bee starts whimpering, which annoys the protagonist a bit. Not knowing what to do, he reassures her, saying, "Just a little longer. I'll soon take you to a safe place where no one will bother you anymore." Days have passed since the deadly chase began. During this time, the group pushed themselves to the limit, sleeping only a little and constantly using the art of mobility. Upon arriving at one point, some warriors from the venomous warrior unit had already stayed behind. Realizing that everyone is sacrificing themselves by using the art of mobility, the protagonist truly understands how important this skill is. As they continue to run, his disciples collapse from exhaustion, though some still manage to keep going. One of them carries the protagonist on his back, and while using the art of mobility, asks the protagonist if they'll really be able to escape. 3 days pass, and another warrior, the leader, collapses, apologizing to the protagonist for no longer being able to keep up. In the end, only the protagonist, his friend, and the queen remain. His friend insists she'll carry him, but the protagonist refuses, saying it would be better for him to keep running to assist the young lady. The young lady slaps his face to wake him up, and motivated but with a tired face, declares that a member of the Tang clan never gives up. More time passes, and they reach the clan's gates. The guards, surprised, notice something coming from the forest. One of them remarks that the young lady has finally returned. There they are, the two of them, one carrying the other, exhausted and sleepless. Seeing their faces, the guard calls the young lady's name and immediately goes to help them. Soon the family members are called in desperation. Her father and grandfather come to meet her. However, upon seeing her in such a precarious state, they begin questioning the protagonist about what's going on. The protagonist asks his father-in-law to calm down and explains that the young lady is just a bit exhausted after using the art of mobility non-stop for 10 days. But unfortunately, there's no time for that. They need to head to the training field immediately. The old man, not understanding, asks why the training field. From his robe, the protagonist pulls out the golden-haired queen bee and quickly explains that other bees will swarm there soon. That's why they need to get to an ancient tree in the training field as quickly as possible. The old man bursts out laughing, finding it unbelievable. The father-in-law, confused, asks how it's possible. He sent the protagonist to fetch honey, and he returned with the queen bee. The old man places his hand on his shoulder and tells him to go quickly. The protagonist leaps over the building, carrying the queen to the training field immediately. He soon notices something and starts shouting. The old man asks what's going on. A massive swarm of bees appears. The protagonist yells, "They're coming for us!" The old man, a bit surprised, exclaims, "That's a lot of bees! Did you bring them all with you?" Soon, they land in front of the ancient tree. The protagonist begins running toward it and starts talking to the queen bee, saying this is the new place he told her about, her new home. The bee begins to fly, and the protagonist comments on how great this new place is. She looks around, then starts flapping her wings rapidly, shaking her body as if she's happy. The protagonist thinks the old man, truly delighted, noticing the presence of the bees, comments that it would be better to get out of the line as soon as possible. The bees are coming. The protagonist agrees. The disciples of the clan soon notice the number of bees flying above their heads. Then, the queen bee begins to make her buzzing sound. Soon, thousands of bees enter the tree. The old man, surprised, comments that in all his years, he has never seen anything like it. The protagonist's mission is soon completed, capturing the queen bee. The bees then start living there. The protagonist mentions that they gave sugar water to the bees that pursued them. After all, they say bonds are created through food, and goodwill begins with a meal. Luckily, there's something like refined sugar in this world. It worked this time. This small feast should help reduce the bees' hostility. It would be even better if they recognized the protagonist as their master. As a master, however, in an instant, the protagonist realizes he forgot something. Curious, several people ask what it is about. The protagonist comments that it was the young lady he forgot. The old man asks if he only remembered just now, and explains that he sent her to the protagonist's mother-in-law to rest a little because she really had used her mobility skill for 10 days in the forest. The protagonist agrees, but feels somewhat guilty, commenting that they barely managed to sleep 4 hours a day. The rest of the time was spent just running. They are surprised, and the old man quickly realizes and asks where the members of the venomous blood unit are. The protagonist, who forgot again, comments that they must be passed out somewhere along the road. And that it's better to send someone to fetch them. Later, the members of the poisoned blood unit return safely to their families. The protagonist visits the cheerful young lady. She comments that they said the bees regained their strength and asks the protagonist if that isn't great. The protagonist agrees and says they are collecting nectar from the poisonous flowers of Mount Clant. The young lady comments that this is very cute. However, Algos interrupts by shouting the protagonist's name. Curious, the protagonist asks what's going on. One of the disciples soon says the protagonist needs to go outside quickly and explains that something is wrong with the bees. It seems like they're looking for something. The protagonist finds it curious and goes out to check. Soon, surprised by the bees, he sees them flying all around the clan. After spotting the protagonist, they begin flying toward him and soon start clinging to him. He gets a bit nervous. The young lady asks if everything is okay, but soon the bees that were clinging to him begin to lift him and make him fly. Not knowing what's happening, he starts asking what they're doing and why they're acting that way, but it's too late. He is already very high up, and the bees begin carrying him somewhere. Meanwhile, on the ground, the young lady and a background character are left clueless about what's happening. Soon, the bees leave him in front of an ancient tree, their new hive. Still confused, the protagonist wonders why they're causing such a commotion and asks if something is wrong. However, one of the little bees starts pushing him toward the tree. Realizing he is being pushed, the protagonist notices it wants him to go inside. He is surprised to see that the bees have already built part of the hive and are working hard to gather honey. Soon, he notices something flying toward him. The queen bee approaches him. She lands on his hand, and soon other little bees also land all over his body. Covered by the bees, the protagonist realizes he can't move anymore as the bees cling to him. But something unexpected happens. The queen bee gets closer and closer to his face until she kisses him, catching the protagonist completely off guard. However, this kiss comes with something strange. The protagonist starts feeling something odd, and after they part from the kiss, he almost falls backward from so much embarrassment and surprise. Embarrassed, the protagonist comments to the queen bee that it was his first kiss and asks what she did. Still feeling strange, the protagonist collapses to the ground, breathless and completely drained. On the ground, without any strength, he asks the queen bee what she just gave him. The large bees watched the protagonist writhing on the ground while a reddish aura on his body expanded more and more, bringing the sensation of heat. Behind this strange discomfort, it seemed like there was an itch in his body. The sensation that took over his body was an intense heat that made him foam at the mouth and nose while grinding his teeth and sweating relentlessly. His heartbeat was very accelerated. Still, with great difficulty, feeling a strong heat in his body, the same sensation as if he were on fire, he slowly stretched out his arm to try to reach the queen bee. With little strength left, his last words before passing out were a question about what she had made him eat, and then he passed out. Still with his eyes closed, the protagonist heard his name being called. The beauty was asking her grandfather what was happening to him while showing her concern for the protagonist. The old man, stroking his beard and with his vast experience in unusual situations, commented that apparently he must have swallowed a very potent elixir. After hearing this, he passed out again. The old man began to guide his kui to help him. Shortly after, the beauty took care of the protagonist with a warm towel. She wiped his face. Sitting on the bed with messy hair, he asked where he was. She replied that he was in the medical wing of the clan. Fixing her hair, she explained that when they saw him, he was being dragged by the golden-haired king bees. She and her grandfather immediately ran to the hive. When they arrived, he was already unconscious, so they brought him to the medical wing. She questioned him, asking if he remembered anything that had happened. The protagonist sighed, putting his hand on his face, a bit upset. He thought about his first kiss in that world. The curious beauty noticed that something was wrong due to his expression and asked if he was okay or if there was something wrong with his body. She also asked if he wanted her to call her grandfather. The protagonist looked at his hands, sighed, and said no. Then he commented that the queen bee fed him the same food she ate. He thought that's what caused that situation. The curious beauty asked what he ate. The protagonist commented that he didn't know the exact name, but if he had to name it, he would call it the king bee's elixir. Surprised, she repeated, "King bee's elixir?" The protagonist, with a small smile on his face, said yes, and explained that the worker bees collect nectar and pollen to feed themselves. Only the workers, who dedicate their lives to work, consume this nectar and pollen. After this explanation, she asked if that was the case. Then, what does the queen bee eat? The protagonist replied that from birth to death, the queen bee feeds exclusively on the king bee's elixir made by the workers. In other words, the jelly that the queen bee forced him to eat was royal jelly. Understanding the situation a bit, she commented, "Ah, I see. So it's the queen bee's exclusive food throughout her life." The protagonist, raising his finger, said, "The king bee's elixir has a special effect." Surprised, she asked, "An effect?" The protagonist immediately explained, "Normal worker bees live a short life of about a month and a half, but the queen bee, eating the king bee's elixir, can live up to 60 times longer." Then he asked, "Don't you think that's incredible?" However, after consuming so much information and still surprised, she told him to control himself, that it was too much information. But with a sigh, she said she understood. "The mystery is solved," she said. She explained, "The internal cultivation method you practiced is the 5 venoms return technique. It's just a beginner's technique, so you wouldn't be able to absorb all the elixir's power. But considering that the golden-haired king bee's honey contains 2 months of internal energy, you basically absorbed 60 times that amount, which would be equivalent to 10 years of internal energy." Then she congratulated him on his lucky encounter. The protagonist began to emit a little of her energy while she repeats 10 years of internal energy. She, a little apprehensive and holding her hair, comments. Besides, she asks him to take a look at the silver mirror afterward. While blushing, she averts her gaze from him, saying that there may be other effects of the queen bee's elixir. Curious, he questions what other effects, scratching his face and showing doubt. Not knowing what it is, he asks what the silver mirror is. He picks up the mirror, and upon looking at his reflection, he notices something strange. His skin is so good it even shines. Still looking at himself, he wonders if royal jelly has always had these kinds of effects. He asks where the country girl from Wine is. Touching his face, he is surprised to realize that not only has his cultivation improved, but also his skin is soft and smooth, almost like a woman's skin. While touching his face, he realizes that perhaps royal jelly, the food produced by the queen bee, may have caused some effects not very pleasant for him, making him imagine that perhaps he has just turned into a girl. He looks around curiously to clear his doubt. Then he looks between his pants, and with a sigh of relief he lies down on the ground, happy for not having lost his most precious possession. Lying on the ground, he remembers that Ain had said that if her grandfather had not guided his chi, something disastrous could have happened. He thinks that at the very least he should thank her grandfather, since he was on the brink of death and was saved. The protagonist leaves the medical wing. He walks through the clan where everyone looks at him. Noticing these stares, he wonders why so many people are giving him strange looks today. He even questions if this might be because his internal energy increased. The stares and whispers bother him so much that he decides to flee and runs off, leaving the extras laughing at him as he runs. He arrives at the clan's restaurant and takes a small peek through the door. He soon spots his father-in-law, his future wife, his mother-in-law, and the old man dining. The protagonist's mother-in-law quickly notices his presence and, pleased, comments on how handsome her son-in-law is. She asks how he is feeling. The protagonist approaches them, greets them, responds that he is fine, and apologizes for worrying them. However, his mother-in-law, already aware of the situation, says it is okay since he had such a fortunate encounter that it becomes a reason to celebrate. Soon, she decides to cause a little embarrassment to her daughter, saying she must be envious of the protagonist's skin. She becomes embarrassed but quickly recovers and invites him to sit. Embarrassed, the protagonist agrees. He sits at the table before a huge banquet where everyone enjoys themselves. His father-in-law asks if he is feeling well after all that happened. The protagonist responds that he is and apologizes again for worrying them. He also says he would like to thank the grandfather after learning that he took great care of him. The old man, smiling, says he heard that the protagonist had a lucky encounter, so he congratulates him. Seeing the curiosity in everyone's expressions, his father-in-law cannot contain himself and asks if he could explain to them what happened. He says he heard a little about the queen bee's elixir from wine, but wants to know exactly what happened. The protagonist does not know how to respond. He scratches his face, unable to find words, but soon responds by saying that it seems the golden-haired queen bee liked her new home a lot and decided to reward him for his kindness. Moving his finger as he explains, he says that she dragged him into the hive and fed him. With the elixir of the king bee, he concludes by saying that he thinks all the confusion started because of it. To his surprise, his mother-in-law comments that even mid-level venomous creatures know how to show gratitude, and she finds this very fascinating. The old man, equally surprised, asks, "By the way, if there's any way to get the king bee's elixir again." He mentions that if they could, it would greatly benefit Tang. The sect leader observes that just the honey from the golden-haired bees would already be an incredible treasure, but that the queen bee's elixir would undoubtedly be an extraordinary blessing. Soon, the protagonist's mother-in-law, excited, agrees and asks her son-in-law if he could get more of the king bee's elixir, leaving everyone at the table confused by her spontaneous reaction. His fiancée then asks the protagonist if he could obtain more of this elixir. The protagonist thinks and reflects. If they were just regular bees, they could simply create several queen cells, the chambers for queen bees, and trick the worker bees into producing royal jelly for them. However, if they tried this trick with the intelligent golden-haired bees, they would be turned into hives in an instant. Besides, royal jelly is basically baby food produced by worker bees. But what the protagonist consumed came directly from the queen herself. He ponders whether what he ate might not even be the same substance, which makes him reflect even more on the situation. He wonders if he should be honest at that moment. Finally, he decides to say sincerely that he thinks it wouldn't be possible to get more of the elixir. This makes the old man and his mother-in-law question why it wouldn't be possible. The protagonist explains that even if someone could consume it, he doesn't know if anyone really would. Curious, the leader asks what he means by this, questioning if perhaps the taste is bad or if it has a strange smell. With seriousness, The protagonist replies that it's neither about the taste nor the smell. Sweating cold, he reveals that the king bee's elixir comes directly from the queen's mouth and that it seems the only way to receive it is through direct contact with the queen herself. He explains that the method involves forming a connection by joining lips with the queen, with her tongue entering the recipient's mouth to transfer the elixir. Everyone is shocked. The old man shouting asks, "A kiss on the queen bee's mouth?" His mother-in-law is left open-mouthed at the explanation. The old man, even more shocked and sweating cold, concludes that they must assume it's impossible to get the elixir unless it's the protagonist, since he was favored by the queen bee. For anyone else, it would be impossible. Soon, his fiancée, understanding what happened, drops her chopsticks, outraged. She asks, "A kiss on the mouth?" with a completely terrifying expression and a murderous look. She says the protagonist's name, insinuating that he kissed the queen bee. With that, I leave today's video. A beautiful night hovers over time. We see someone clenching their fists so tightly that their veins throb. This person is the leader of the Murim Alliance, the Emperor of the Fist, Ju Junghak. In his chambers, a servant, calling him the leader of the alliance, announces he has brought tea. He allows him to enter. A beautiful woman with a gorgeous dress, a lovely face, and beautiful hair, carries his tea on a tray. She says she has prepared the white dew of Mount Zishan. The leader of the alliance is surprised, and he soon communicates that this is the tea from his homeland. The beautiful lady says yes. This is the famous tea of Mount Zishan from Nanchang. Content: the leader says he will enjoy it. She serves his tea, and with great delicacy and just about to drink it, someone else calls the leader's attention, saying it is General Jegal Hu. After his tea is interrupted, the leader of the alliance tells him to enter. The young man introduces himself, greeting him, and apologizes for interrupting his rest, the leader of the alliance. Then he says he actually received a message from the Tang clan of Sichuan, and he thought it necessary to inform him immediately. The leader says he understands. Since he came with such urgency, it must be something important, and he tells him to speak at once. The young man adjusts his robe, and from it he pulls out a scroll. After placing it on the table, he says that it is about the Rakshasa of the Bloody Hand, Tak Unyang. The Tang clan recovered both his head and the secret manual of the venomous art of the Bloody Hand. The leader of the Murim Alliance, furious at this news, even shattering his teacup, questions him. What? The art of the Bloody Hand? Where and how did they manage to recover this terrifying manual? The young man, seeing the reaction of the Emperor of the Fist, grows somewhat cautious. The young man, seeing the reaction of the Emperor of the Fist, becomes a little cautious, still clenching his fists and gritting his teeth. The leader affirms that years ago, Tak Unyang disappeared after being struck by the blow of the divine sovereign of the 10,000 poisons. Later, it seems he must have ended up on Hainan Island and lived isolated there. The young man who brought the report claims to have an even more interesting story and says that the famous demon, Takunyang, was defeated by a young master of poisons. The leader appeared surprised in his expression, and quickly curious, he asked what he meant, who the young master of poisons might be. The general, finding the story very interesting, even sits down and says that the story behind it is quite intriguing. Fanning himself, he says he believes that even the leader of the alliance might find it interesting. He soon asks for permission to explain in detail. However, the young lady who had served tea earlier seems not very pleased with the idea. We return to the hall of the patriarch of the Tang clan of Sichuan, and there, all the highest-ranking members were present, as well as the protagonist. In the hall, they were discussing something. One of them, outraged, said that there are people bold enough to sell the information they had obtained to other places. Everyone there found it audacious. They were surprised that there could be people willing to tarnish the clan's reputation just to sell some information. The protagonist, with a strange expression, softly whispered to his fiancée, saying that, surprisingly, they weren't speaking ill of his father-in-law. She replied that, of course, they wouldn't. The protagonist's father-in-law began speaking, silencing everyone in the room, who turned their attention to him. He said, How could someone dare tarnish the family's honor? Even the elders of the collateral branches are furious about this. After all, we are all one family. We've already asked the beggar's sect to find out who they are, so we should have news soon. He mentioned that he intended to personally visit the commandery of Yingchuan. One of the elders questioned him, asking how he intended to handle this situation. The father-in-law sighed, but soon said, "I will begin with the soul annihilation poison, the bloody flames poison, and the intestinal paralysis poison." And with a murderous and terrifying aura that made everything tremble around the table, the father-in-law declared that once they are writhing in agony, with their blood boiling, organs dissolving, and feeling as if their souls are being torn apart, I will finish with the 7-step soul-cutting poison. The protagonist was shocked by the mix of poisons his father-in-law planned to use on the traitor. The leader affirmed to his servant to summon the poison annihilation unit immediately. He would depart right away. The servant acknowledged and followed the orders. Just outside the meeting hall, everyone from the Annihilation Unit awaits your command. They remain on standby, and the father-in-law turns and says to the protagonist, "Son-in-law, I'm leaving. Take care of things while I'm gone." He greets the protagonist, who understands and asks his father-in-law to take care of himself on his journey. The father-in-law, smiling mockingly, asks what he should be careful of, for it is they who should be worried. The father-in-law gives his command to the Annihilation Unit, who all march out shouting that they will ensure their punishment will be unforgettable, with a great revenge. The protagonist and his fiancée watch. The protagonist asks his fiancée if those men are part of the Venom Annihilation Unit, after saying he has never seen them before. She, a little surprised by the question, replies, saying they are assigned to deal with somewhat heavy tasks, and explains that their main responsibility is to eliminate people, that they are called the Venom Annihilation Unit. The protagonist is surprised by their work. Soon, 2 elders enter the scene. His fiancée and the protagonist greet the esteemed elders of the Tang sect. The elder in front, with a slight smirk, says he has heard they recently had a lucky encounter. The protagonist, surprised by the question, still answers yes to the elders, and thinks they must be talking about the royal jelly of the golden-haired queen bees. The elder who was behind steps forward, drawing attention, and says the reason for summoning them there is to ask for a small favor. Surprised, the protagonist questions what kind of favor it would be, and asks if it has anything to do with the golden-haired queen bee, but the chubbier elder says no, that's not it, and asks the protagonist if he really thinks they would stoop so low as to covet something like that. The protagonist says that indeed miraculous elixirs and rare treasures find their owners naturally. Curious, the protagonist asks what it would be then. The elders feel somewhat hesitant to say. However, the chubby one gathers courage and approaches the protagonist's ear and whispers softly, "The medicine of the earth beetle," and reminds him that it was he who made it, and says that he has authority over it. The protagonist quickly understands their situation, and seeing it as an opportunity, the protagonist tells them with a little grin that he has found it difficult to adapt to life in the clan, but if they, the esteemed elders, are willing to help him in various ways, there is no reason for him not to share with them. The elders, seeing that he is willing to share, become overjoyed and say that now, yes, this is how one should speak. He has a good head, and they call him son-in-law and say that from now on, he will have their full support, so he doesn't need to worry and can live comfortably. However, soon the former leader of the sect appears. Surprised by their closeness, he asks what cheerful conversation they are having. The chubby one says it's just a friendly approach to the son-in-law. The protagonist agrees. With his relaxed laughter, the great elder says that they finally seem to be appreciating the true value of the protagonist. They begin to flatter the protagonist. However, one of the sect's disciples shouts to the great patriarch, saying there is a major problem. Surprised, the patriarch questions what it might be. The disciple informs him that the lord of the province of Sichuan is on the verge of death. The information takes everyone by surprise, leaving them shocked by the situation. The protagonist, also surprised, questions whether the dosage was not followed correctly. The disciple, quite reluctant, says that apparently, after experiencing the effects of the medicine, the Lord took new concubines and began consuming more than double the recommended amount. The protagonist cannot believe what he has done. The patriarch, sighing and disappointed, says he must leave immediately. He adds that since the protagonist is the only man left in the house, he should protect the women. He asks if the protagonist understood. Saluting him, the protagonist says yes. The patriarch immediately departs. Confident, the protagonist wonders what could go wrong. Night falls, and he sits on a bench alongside his fiancée. She asks the protagonist how his learning of the dual origin art of the 10 poisons is progressing. Sighing, the protagonist says it is not as difficult to understand as it was at the beginning. He thinks that if the technique of the return of the 5 poisons feels like a single large sphere moving inside the body, then the dual origin art of the 10 poisons is more like a 2-cylinder engine. His fiancée says that by now, he has probably already developed some resistance to common poisons. She adds that, besides that, he should be able to release his chi directly or even infuse objects with it. Surprised, the protagonist asks if that's true. Confident, he says he will try. He stands and distances himself from an object. He focuses on his energy. He begins to channel the internal energy from left to right, spinning the 2 spheres in the same direction. When the chi circulates completely through his body, he releases it, launching his blade, which he had been channeling energy into, against the object. The blade, gaining high speed after hitting the object, creates a large hole in it. Surprised by the result and excited, he asks his fiancée if she saw that. She says it was incredible that he managed to perfectly infuse the dagger with his chi. Some masked individuals who were hiding around the area in search of an opening are surprised by the dagger embedded in the wall after it nearly hit him, making even them question whether they had been noticed there and if they should eliminate them. One of them says that this doesn't seem like a coincidence. One of the masked individuals holding a book says that although it's just a copy, they managed to obtain the secret manual of the bloody hand poisonous art, so their work there is done, and says it would be better to leave quickly and return to the main sect before problems arise. One of them, calling the Tang sect fools, says they didn't think the sect would be so careless with the security of the training hall, and thanks to their negligence, escaping would be easy. However, they sense a sweet aroma in the air, making them question what that smell might be. But this sweet and delicate aroma in the air, so alluring, is actually the scent of the golden-haired queen bees, which were flying closer to them.